Hey everyone, and welcome to extremerigs.net. My name is Stren, and today I'll be talking you through a review of the CaseLabs Mercury S8. The S8 is the latest and possibly last, we don't know for sure, of the Mercury lineup. The Mercury lineup originally started as a smaller, low-cost option, and it originally only catered to mini ITX cases. However, there was a lot of demand for something a little bigger that still had the motherboard horizontal. So then came the S5, which was a mini ATX version. And then lastly, again, there was a lot of requests for a larger version still for full-size ATX boards. And this is what we have here today. This is the CaseLabs S8. Now, for those of you who don't know much about CaseLabs, CaseLabs are known as a boutique case builder. They specialize in aluminum cases that are very high quality and that generally are on the larger side, That's not to say they're unnecessarily large. They please the enthusiasts and the niche people who aren't satisfied by cases that, the run-of-the-mill guys are producing. So what does boutique mean? Well, it means that the cases, because they're high quality and high quality materials like aluminum, are going to cost more than a case that's made out of steel and plastic and built in China. CaseLabs are very proud to say that they do all their design, all their engineering, all their manufacturing, all their customer support from the US. So they're based in Southern California, in fact, only an hour or two from me. And so that's one of the advantages. You know what you're getting is high quality, and these are built to order. There's a lot of customization. When you buy a normal kind of high production run, kind of cheaper case, there are no options. Maybe you'll get an option to have the black one or the white one. That's generally about it. With CaseLabs, each case is made to order. There's not stock sitting on the shelf and you just buy it and it gets shipped to you. You get to specify, do I want a window? Do I want this option? Do I want USB ports? Do I want this panel to be black and that one to be white? You can do all sorts of crazy things that other people won't let you do. So enough about CaseLabs. Let's talk about the case. As I mentioned before, options will be a big part of your decision. And it's easier to think about the case more like buying a car, except that there's no sleazy salesman. When you buy the case, you start with a starting price, and then you're going to add your options, and that will push up the price. So although the price I think is $360 as the starting price, you're much more likely to end up with a final cost more around $400 and something, just because you're probably not going to choose the base options, and we certainly wouldn't recommend you do. So the first option to consider is the color. This one obviously is black. You can also get it in white, and you can get it in primer gray. It's called primer gray because it's a base color or a base coat that can be used if you want to spray paint on top of it, or if you want a powder coat on top. A lot of people think you can't powder coat without stripping it back to bare metal. But this is a special primer coat that you can. On top of just the colors, you can mix and match the colors. So if you want the external black and the internal white, or vice versa, you can do that. Obviously, the more complex your mixing and matching, the longer your order is going to take to ship. Typically, a black case, I think, is 5 to 7 days after you order, it's shipped. If you're using white, it takes a bit longer, and then if you're mixing and matching panels, I think it takes longer still. Now, all of the CaseLabs cases so far have been built around this idea of having a strong internal frame that's easily moddable, where every panel can be taken apart. And so some of the cases are shipped flat pack. This one by default is. If you sweet talk them, they'll build it for you. However, that means it will cost extra to ship. The nice thing about the internal frame is that you never have to worry about the strength of the frame during construction. Some other boutique cases like Mountain Mods, the frame doesn't really have much strength, or you have to put the whole thing together before the full thing has strength. It's not the case with CaseLabs. These external panels all just pop off. They're all clipped on, and once they're off, you have easy access to everything. And that internal frame is built like a tank. It may look fairly small once we've taken these panels off, but it can carry a lot of weight. It's made out of thick aluminum, so it's not going to flex with the weight of radiators. You can really put a lot of weight in, a lot of stuff in this case, and it would be just fine. It's not something to worry about. So, before we get to the internals, we're going to talk about the externals. So first off, the front panel. Along here, we have the flex bays. Flex bays are what CaseLabs calls the cutout for 5 1/4 inch bays. So normally, when a case has a 5 1/4 inch bay, it will have walls so that you can mount your items to the wall. And you'll push it in, and there'll be little supports there, and then you screw it in from the side. That's not how CaseLabs works. They have a more flexible system, hence the name Flex Bay. They don't have to be used as 5 1/4 inch drive bays. If you want to, you use an accessory to mount it, and it just pushes right on the front. However, they sell accessories that do more. You can get radiator mounts like this one. You can get hard drive rack mounts, or just fan mounts as well. So there's a lot more capability you can get now. On other cases, you may end up modding the case to remove the 5 1/4 inch bay cage or the hard drive cage. There's no need to mod anything. That's one of the beauties of CaseLabs. And it's also why it's hard to actually mod a CaseLabs case, because there's almost nothing left to do except for something aesthetic. So that's the flex bay system. On the right side here, or I suppose the left side, this is a window. Now this is one of the first options you'll want to choose. If you do not choose the window, you can choose to either have a blank front panel or a ventilated front panel, and on the inner frame will be two 120mm cutouts for fans, and that will be sized for a 240mm radiator. So you can mount fans if you want to, you can mount a radiator if you want to, or you will also get shipped blanks to seal the hole if you want to as well. The last option on the front panel is this little panel here. It contains a power switch, a reset switch, and in this case, 4 USB 3 ports, a headphone port, and a microphone jack. I said headphone port, I mean jack, 3.5mm standard. So these are very useful. If you have a fully loaded water-cooled computer, you'll know it's very heavy, and you don't often want to move it. When you want to get access to things, it's useful to have these, even if you're not planning to get them. I believe this, the USB and the headphone and microphone, I think the upcharge is about $25. I would say it's worth it. CaseLabs cases you generally keep for a very long time. They're not about to wear out. So at some point, you're probably going to find this useful. If you don't want the power and reset switch, which would be quite odd, you can choose not to get it. I would, of course, advise you to get it, unless you're going to build your own, maybe in the flex bay or, I don't know, somewhere else. So that's the front panel. On the side here, we have a door. The doors are interchangeable. This door in particular is fitted again with a optional extra. This has a window, and this is the extended version of the window. That means it goes a little higher, and it also goes all the way to the base. The regular window isn't going to show you this base compartment. You can see there's a little floor here. Everything below that's going to be hidden if you get the regular window. So it depends how much you want to show off the stuff in these bottom compartments. In general, if you're at all lazy, hide these, because there's always going to be something a little messy. Now, if you choose to hide them, you then get the choice. Do you want ventilated panels like this? This is the normal regular size window. So you can get this solid, or you can get it ventilated like this one. And that depends on how you have your cooling set up. Are you running positive pressure, negative pressure, and what you have in your compartments. So that's a total design choice by you. I wouldn't say there's any strong recommendation that we have to suggest to you. Okay, now for the backside. Everyone loves a good backside. Here we have the power supply unit. You can see it's rotated flat here, not as in most cases, which would be rotated. And we'll talk about that. That leaves a little space here, which CaseLabs uses for other things. Along here we have a 120mm fan cutout, again with a supplied blank to fill it. Just 4 screws to secure that. Then above the motherboard we have a fan cutout. This is the hex mesh version, and we would recommend the hex mesh version not only because it looks cool, but it gives you the option. And the option that you get is to use a 120mm fan, which is the inner screw, or the outer screw, which is for a 140mm fan. If you get the pure fan cutout, you only get a 120mm cutout. So I would recommend the hex mesh, plus it looks cool. In addition, you have these 2 little dimples here. These pull out and there's tubing holes, and there are supplied grommets. And so that just lets you run tubing outside of the case easily without again having to mod anything. This is just in case you want to use an external radiator or a chiller, for example. So that is the back of the panel. Oh, one more thing. The 8 in the name comes from the number of PCI slots that it supports. In this case, it has a full 8. Some ATX cases will only support 7 slots, which means no quad GPUs. This has the full 8, so you can do that, and there's no worries there. So, moving on to the last panel, well, the last exterior panel. This is the top panel. So you can kind of see there's some fans in this side. Again, we see the same ventilation panel. This is, of course, the ventilated option. You can get this, therefore, in the solid pattern. I say pattern, there is no pattern when it's solid. It's just blank. You can also get this in a window version. Obviously, if you get this solid or the window, you're not going to be running radiators up top. And the last option on the tops is to get an extended top. And what that means is that this top grows a little higher. And it means you can mount fans in between the top of the frame and the top of the top, if that makes sense. So that's the top, and you'll understand that a bit more later when we talk about the top of the internal frame and the drop-in mounts. If we rotate the case to look at the base, we'll see a few things here. The first is another fan hole cutout. This is sized for a 140mm fan. You therefore could run a single 140 radiator here if you wanted. And we see, again, 2 120mm fan cutouts. And these are sized, again, for a 240mm radiator. You can fit a 240 in the base if you want to. The last one, where is it here, is a air intake for the power supply. You can run the power supply with the fan down like this, and you can see a short power supply has the fan more towards the back here. A longer one will push it further out. Or you can even run the power supply 180 degrees rotated. It doesn't really matter. Again, it depends on personal preference. The performance differences will be small. The main difference will be if you're worried about dust and you're trying to create positive pressure, negative pressure, whatever you want to do. The last thing are these feet. By default, you get standard rubber feet. You can see there's a little screw pattern here that looks like the number 5 on a dice. That is if you want to use casters. Casters are little wheels, so you can add on 4 wheels for, again, optional extras. A little upcharge, and that just means the case is a lot easier to move around. Some people like that, some people don't. On this size case, I probably wouldn't bother with wheels, and I'm a big fan of wheels. Just because I think it's just small enough and just light enough that you'll be okay. It also raises it off the ground more, which can be a good or bad thing. If you're sitting it on carpet, you might want the wheels just to keep it away from the carpet more. Otherwise it will suck up a lot of dust under there. So that's the base. Let's get these panels taken off and we can see more of what's going on with the case. And I'll show you just how easy this is to do. So let's start with this top panel. You can see you just grab it, and there are these little spring clips here and some little nipples under here, and the nipple just gets held by the spring clip. It's very easy to pull off. And CaseLabs usually sends some extras so that if these ever get worn over time, you can replace them. Again, they're just screwed in there. The side panel also is just gonna unclip. Again, one in each corner. Sometimes there's an extra one. I think on the front panel there's an extra one. And just to prove to you that the side panels are interchangeable, we can pop this one on here. There we go. Just took the panel from the left side, put it on the right side. Again, comes off right away. So you can see that things are starting to look quite open already. And that's the beauty of a CaseLabs case. This very quick to strip down and modify, change components. No other case has that much flexibility. So now as we look at the case, you can see much better this kind of top chamber where the motherboard is. This upper level where you can mount radiators, and this lower level where you can mount the power supply and other stuff. So let's talk about that lower level chamber first. As we said before, you can mount a 240 radiator in here, as we have here. This is a 30mm radiator with push and pull fans. You can see there's still a good amount of clearance there. Obviously there's not so much clearance that you could run a monster radiator with push and pull fans, because you'd be pretty much in the ceiling or very close to it. Not much point with that. I would recommend something on the thinner side just to make your life easier, otherwise you're scrabbling around, hurting your hands trying to get the fittings on and stuff like that. One thing I would have liked to have seen, like the top, and we'll talk about that later, is a drop-in mount. This is fixed to the frame, this radiator. It would be nice if that was a removable mount. Now, by default, the case comes with a hard drive rack. This is really the hard drive chamber. Now what you get is this piece here. This is a hard drive rack connected to a base plate. The base plate secures to the bottom of the frame here. So it would sit in here where that radiator is. You can see 4 holes along here repeated 3 times. So hard drives can stack here. And the nice thing about the CaseLabs hard drive mounts are they all come with these rubber isolating mounts, so that the vibrations from the motor in your hard drive don't get transmitted as easily to the case. You can also get adapters. This is for 3.5-inch drives. If you have 2.5-inch drives, CaseLabs also sells adapters to make these into a double 2.5. So each rack here, well, there's only one rack on this, but you'll see there's optional mounting for a second rack. So each rack can take 4 3.5 drives, or with adapters 8 SSDs. So if you get both, you could put 8 hard drives or 16 SSDs. And that's in addition to some super secret storage space. Because of the super secret storage space, which I'll talk about in a second, I wouldn't bother using this. I would mount a 240 radiator, because you really don't need to. Unless you're doing some crazy RAID setup, in which case, get a NAS or something. So that's the hard drive rack. Comes by default. You don't have to pay extra unless you want the second rack. Alright, so that's the lower chamber. Notice that up here is a 360, but down here we only have the 240 mount, and that's because of the front panel here. These stick out enough that you would have clearance issues to mount a 360 here. You could do it, and there is an optional side mount to mount a 360 in here, but if you do that, you're going to have to figure something else out with this front panel. So just bear that in mind. Alright, that's the lower chamber. As we said, on the far side, we have the power supply. You can see there's nothing else in here, so you could fit an extremely long power supply. However, there is only one power supply mount, but these days that shouldn't be a problem. For most people, a 1600 watt power supply is really enough, even for a quad graphics card setup. I know there'll be some people who disagree. For those that do, CaseLabs have other cases that are even bigger that can do that for you. And if you want the horizontal setup and 2 power supplies, you can add a pedestal and mount a PSU in the pedestal. If you don't know what a pedestal is, it's a baby case that sits underneath. So it's going to be basically the same height as this compartment, the same size, the same look, and it's just going to go underneath and raise the case up. Obviously there's a lot of space in here. There is that 140mm fan hole here, so you could mount a 140 radiator there. Or you can use your flex bays along here to mount a vertical radiator into this compartment here. Up to you. So many options with CaseLabs, it's always hard to know what to do. Lots of room to work on the motherboard here. That's one really nice feature. Part of the problem with horizontal boards setups are that, if you have the radiators up here, you're worried about getting your hands in to do stuff. And that's solved in 2 different ways. One is there's a lot of clearance here. This is an AlphaCool UT60 radiator. That means it's 60mm thick, and you have push and pull fans mounted. So that's another 50mm. So we have 110mm of cooling up here, and you can see there's still a lot of space between the motherboard and the radiator. So that is going to make your life easy. Another thing that's going to make your life easy is this removable motherboard tray. Now on most CaseLabs cases, like the Magnum line and the Merlin line, the motherboards pull out the back. There's normally a handle on the back of it, and you undo some thumb screws, you pull it out the back, and the whole thing comes out. This one's a little different. There are 4 screws, of which I haven't put all 4 in. But instead of the back coming out, the tray is just a single flat piece. So now we've removed these screws. You'll see what happens here. Gotta remove that too. The motherboard tray lifts up and out. And there we go. That's how long it takes to remove the motherboard tray. Now, the only thing that actually would take a bit longer is if you've screwed your graphics cards in to the back wall here. Obviously, you got to undo those screws too if you've done that, because that's going to take a little longer. And all your cables, your tube may be connected. If you haven't used QDCs, that's going to take a little while longer. But this makes your life, in general, very easy, particularly if you use quick disconnects. We love quick disconnects. Now, the cool thing about this motherboard tray is it has the super secret storage space. So if we flip this over, you'll see underneath here is a hard drive. You can mount two 3.5-inch drives, or you can mount 4 SSDs in this direction. Oops, one there, one there, one there, one there. You can see these little cutouts here for cabling. I haven't tested, but I assume that means you can actually put the SSDs, if they're thin enough, inside this little thing. Again, you see another cutout there, so you can thread your wires in between. You just see my finger going in that hole there. So this is really nice, because with 4 SSDs and 2 hard drives, what more do you need? How many more drives do you have that you need to use that lower chamber there with the hard drive rack? Use that for cooling. If you really need to use that, go for it. You have that option. But for most people, this is enough. These days, with cheap large SSDs, I like to just run one large SSD. And if people need large storage, run that in a NAS. It's easy, it's low power, it's on all the time, your files are shared between all the computers. It's just easy. If you have lots of files, well, crap, you could run 4 1 terabyte SSDs. 4 terabytes of space right there. Obviously that's going to cost a bit, but you know, you pay to play. So that's the motherboard tray. Before we finish with this, I want to point out this is the ATX version of the tray. And you can see this motherboard is sticking out a bit. That's because this is a Rampage 4 Extreme. The Asus high-end boards like this, they call them extended ATX. It's kind of a weird format, but essentially they stick out like this on any ATX tray. If you want to avoid this overhang, you can get the SSI CEB tray, which is much bigger. If I grab hold of that for 1 second, let's put this down. The SSI CEB tray is for the SSI CEB standard. Now all of these support boards that are smaller than them. And so if we hold this up, here, come on. Which way around does this go? Like this. You can see this one is much longer. And this one is really designed for 2 processor boards. You can still use it with a Rampage 4 Extreme. So you can see it has these extra wiring cutouts. A board like the Rampage 4 Extreme will end, you can see these are the end screws for ATX. This is the end of the board for a full-size ATX. And the Asus eATX boards will end there. If you have a real SSI CEB or a 2-processor board, they usually have these extended screw holes over here. So this motherboard is going to get the same support on both trays. Personally, I would go for this one because I don't like the look of a tray sticking out further. However, if you do, then you can get this. As always, there's an upcharge. It's an optional extra. By default, you get that one. Now, one thing you might think about is how easy it is to undo the thumb screws here for the graphics cards. Now, the good thing is they're thumb screws, so if you have small hands, you can get in here. If you have a fat radiator though, obviously it's going to be harder. Another reason you may want the extended top if you're running a really fat radiator. However, the thing that single-handedly makes your life easier is the optional top mounts. Now, even if you've said, I definitely want two 360mm radiators up top, you still have an option to choose. Do you want the 360 cutout on the frame, or do you want a drop-in mount? The drop-in mount will make your life easier. So what do we mean by a drop-in mount? If we rotate the case over, and hope that nothing else falls out, you'll see along here 3 screws. Oh, there we go. And another 3 here. And so that's what holds this radiator mount into the case. If you don't get the drop-in mount version, this panel can't come off. So if we quickly undo this, you'll see that starting to flap about now. There goes the screw. There goes another screw. And you can see the whole thing just lifts out. And there you have lots of access. So now, after 30 seconds, you have really easy access to these screws if you want, or to change anything on here. And that, again, is an optional extra. However, it makes your life so much easier. This is one thing I would definitely recommend. Now, we've talked about nearly everything on the case. And so the last thing we're going to talk about is something that's not really this case. It's an optional extra for this case, but it can also be a fully fledged case on its own. This is what is known as the S8. However, there is also the S8 test bench, and that is a slightly different beast. Instead of these front panels and this top frame, if you order the S8 test bench, what you're going to get is the same lower section, the same bottom. This front panel is going to be different. It's going to be lower. And you're going to get this one instead. You still get a nice pretty frame to clip to it, which is shown here, or the other way around, you know what I mean, like that. You can see it's lower, and it's lower by about 120mm fan. So you see, now we have only the 120mm fan cutout, was before you could have the 2. And you only get 6 flex bays here. You still get your little panel cut out here. And the same thing goes for the back. Instead of this full back, you get a short version. And now with no hex mesh. So why is it shorter? Well, for a test bench, you need a lot of access to the motherboard. You want to be able to get your hands in, you want to be able to change cooling and change graphics cards. So there are no walls anymore. There's only this back panel to hold stuff in place and the front panel to mount stuff to if you want. The other option that you can do with the test bench are external mount radiators. External mount radiators means that instead of mounting a radiator inside the side chamber, kind of like this one might be, there's a side mount that clips to the outside that lets you mount it outside. So the case gets wider. But with that, you can mount a 360 here, or here, or here, or here. So it's the only test bench I'm aware of that lets you run 4 360mm radiators. That's pretty unique and pretty different. Now, personally, I don't need that in my test bench, but maybe you do. I really like to get my hands in there, so I would prefer something even more open. I'd like this front panel to be shorter. Hopefully they'll make that an option, but today it's not quite an option. So that is the test bench option. You get a discount if you buy it with the regular S8. And I don't mean to buy two cases by that. I mean, if you get these conversion panels, if you buy them separately, they cost $80 for the 3. If you buy them with the regular S8, you buy them for $60. I don't know why you'd get both, but if you do, at least you get a discount. I can see people buying the test bench. I can see people buying the S8. I don't see why people would buy the S8 and the conversion kit. But there we go. Maybe a just in case kind of setup. So, to recap on the S8, there's a lot of water cooling support. You can mount two 360s up top, or two 240s, or two 280s. You have a 120 or 140mm fan mount in the back, where I'm guessing you could also fit a 120mm radiator if you wanted. You can fit a 240mm radiator here. If you don't use any of the flex bays, you could buy a flex bay accessory to mount a 360 in the front. You can also mount a 240mm radiator down here. If you don't use the front switches and USBs, you could even do a side-mounted 360 there. In addition, you can buy pedestals to add even more cooling. The last place you can mount a radiator would be down here, which is a 140mm radiator spot, or a 140mm fan. I wouldn't do that personally. In fact, I wouldn't use a lot of these mounts because a lot of them clash. You can't mount 360s up top and a 360 in the front, because, you know, one radiator is going to come up to here and you won't have enough space for your 360 there. So for that reason, the way I would set it up really depends on how you want your windows. If you want a top mount window, then have front mounted radiators. If you want a front mounted window, then have top mounted radiators. And I would say that because of the sheer amount of space here, that's a lot of wasted space if you go with a window. So I would personally go with the top mounted 360s. Then you could add a shorter radiator in the flex bay. Maybe a 280, maybe a 240, depending on what else you have to put in there. And then I would add the 240 in the base. So right there, that's pretty much two 240s and two 360s. That's a lot of cooling potential. So this case can cool a lot of stuff. I mean, I would say that's enough cooling for 3 graphics cards. If you want a 4th graphics card, maybe you want to add a pedestal. But for 2 to 3 graphics cards, that's plenty. For 1 graphics card and a CPU, it's overkill. So it's a really good case. It's got a lot of potential. It has this unique hard drive mount. It has the unique tray. It's just got a lot of cool stuff going on. A lot of options, a lot of flexibility, a lot of customization. I really like the case, and that's why we gave it a gold award. And if you want to read more about the case, we have separate reviews for both the S8 in regular form like this and the S8 in the test bench form. So go to the website extremerigs.net and check it out. And if you want to, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, all that social media stuff. Of course, we participate in most of the forums too, so sometimes you can catch us there. Yeah, I love this case. I didn't think I'd love it as much as I did. But if you're looking for horizontal motherboard and your water cooling, this is the case to get. And you know, the thing I said in the written review was, the question this case asks is not why buy this case, but why would you buy anything else? And the only two answers I can think of for why you would buy anything else is that you don't want horizontal motherboard, or you want something cheaper, fair enough, or you want something with more cooling, fair enough. Or I suppose you don't like the CaseLabs look, you know. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder and all that. But this is a truly great case for functionality. It is second to none. Like I mentioned a billion times, the options add up. You know, this case, you know, at base price is $350 or $360 or something like that. However, you know, as configured as it was here, the price was more like $460. And you know, you could get into the 500s if you wanted to. So it's not cheap, but the kind of rigs that would be going into this case are expensive. You know, if you look at the budget for a high-end water cooling loop and high-end components, you know, people these days don't seem to be blinking at $800 graphics cards, multiple $800 graphics cards. So when people complain about the price of a $400 or $500 case, I start to think, well, hang on, you spent, you know, $6 or $7 grand on hardware for to go in the case, but you're unwilling to spend $500. So it's all relative. But the case itself is built like a tank. It's gonna last. And the nice thing is, it's almost the perfect case for everyone. Lots of visibility, lots of cooling, and you can set it up in so many ways that it's almost impossible to be disappointed by it. That's the nice thing. It really is a case for the masses. If by masses you mean enthusiasts, but still. So that's it from me. Like I said, check out the website, extremerigs.net, follow us Facebook, social media, all that good stuff. We will be back with more reviews very soon.